Hi everyone, welcome back to those who are rejoining us, and welcome to our new attendees. So this is our first, no, this is our first virtual inquiry, but our fourth annual inquiry.
We had a brilliant morning session focusing on education, and now the next session will be focusing on race and discrimination, a prevalent topic that has been brought to light in recent events.
So as a reminder, for the focus on children's rights for the next sections are Article 2 and 30, which are a right to protection against discrimination and rights to children from minority groups.
Our inquiries are normally held in Parliament, but due to the pandemic, we've had to hold it virtually.
We know it's been a really difficult time for everyone due to COVID, but we felt it was still vital to have this event, as children and young people will be given the opportunity to have their voices heard.
Especially now, children's rights are even more important due to the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people.
So today is not only the Children's Rights Inquiry, but it's also Human Rights Day, which is an important day for all of us, as it identifies everyone as being equal, regardless of their gender, race, age, and the list goes on.
To put this inquiry together, we have been supported by our Link Up crew. They are a group of 7 to 15-year-olds that meet monthly to discuss and implement change on political matters that impact children.
Throughout the pandemic, they have been continuing to work so hard by meeting virtually to prepare for today.
And this inquiry serves as a testament to children and young people who experience and witness issues in their day-to-day life. This inquiry hopes to give young people the power to uphold their rights and make a real positive change towards something better. If we are to fully engage with the issues that young people face, we must give them the platform to be a part of the change that they wish to see.
I really do look forward to hearing what discussions will arise out of today, and I hope that all the children from schools will use this as a platform to ask questions or voice their opinions in change.
This inquiry isn't so much about number of attendees, it's about the outcome of the event. We're really looking forward to your contributions today, but also to carry on the conversation after the event. Before we get started, just a reminder of housekeeping. Please keep your mics turned off unless you're speaking, and put your cameras on if you can, so it's not intimidating for the children and young people.
Without further ado, I would now like to pass on to our co-chair, Precious.
Hi everyone, I'm your co-chair today. My name is Precious UBK and I'm a PAL, peer outreach worker for those of you who don't know me. So what am I looking forward to the most today? I'm looking forward to hearing the amazing discussions from all the different people who are presenting the evidence, and also our amazing questions which the fantastic Link Up crew are doing. Me personally, I've got a personal attachment to Link Up crew because I used to be on it and I know how important the work they do is. So I would just like to hand it over and introduce our amazing Link Up crew. The first person, Abigail. Would you like to introduce yourself and say what you're looking forward today?
Hi guys, my name is Abigail and I am from EYC, which stands for Eritrean Youth Club. I'm 11 years old and today I'm looking forward to listening to what everyone's going to be speaking about today. I'll pass it on to Hewan.
Hi everyone, I'm Hewan. I'm 12 years old and I'm from EYC, which stands for Eritrean Youth Club. And today I'm looking forward to asking questions and hearing what other people have to say. I'm going to pass it on to Michael.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today I'm looking forward to the amazing questions and everyone getting involved and seeing what everyone has to say. And I'll pass it on back to Precious.
Thank you for that Link Up crew. That was amazing. We should have another member joining us of part of the chair called Aaliyah. So if Aaliyah is not here, that's fine. But if she does join later, I'll get her to introduce herself to everyone. So just before we go into the evidence segment of today's inquiry, I'm going to pass it back to the Link Up crew members who are going to introduce the first person to speak. Abigail, would you like to do that?
The first person we have today speaking is Jerome Harvey.
My name is Jerome Harvey Ajay. This is a topic that is close to my heart. I work in the Violence Reduction Unit, and I'm in charge of the Youth Action Group. So the reason why I guess I'm involved is because I've had real life experience of race and discrimination. And this year is what I would see as the year of the purging. So the year of all of this stuff internally, so internally within systems and internally within ourselves coming out. And you've got lots of finger pointing. So there's a phrase that we use called, if you blame or shame, you end the game. So if you blame other people for not being able to do enough, or you feel shameful for not being able to do enough, you lose because there's no responsibility. So just to give you an insight into like a shocking statistic that we've come across, there was like 34,000 stops over a couple of months in London, and 80% of those were Black young men. And then you've got like the head of police saying that there isn't a problem, and there clearly is in terms of the experience that people on the ground level are feeling. So the system needs to get to a place of acknowledging that there's a problem, and it might be because of there's a few different factors that relate to this. So what's also interesting is that of those 80% of stops, less than 0.5% of people who got stopped made a complaint, which means they're not even empowered to understand their rights or even fight back in a sense to say, actually, this isn't okay. So just to touch on something, so something that has really kind of been vivid, and I guess it's for everyone, is that how George Floyd's death impacted so many people, and the level of sensitivity we have to these issues unconsciously. And what you find is there's this culture of listening to respond, which we have a lot within our systems, not understanding to develop. So when you understand to develop, you basically, you do a lot of things around prevention. So you develop preventative things, and you don't wait for an incident to happen before you respond. You're already doing the work, you're already developing. But we have a culture of listening to respond. So that can come across as not authentic. So, when we come up with all these plans around, race and discrimination, it's always been ingrained in what we do anyway. It should have been based on rights, but it seems that we've lost our way a bit. So for me, it's important that all of us as professionals and individuals take responsibility, absolute responsibility. And there is no blame or shame. It's just saying, hey, we didn't do enough. We didn't recognize the disparities between different races and different genders. When we think about discrimination, we often forget about people with disabilities, because that plays a massive part in them being able to be enabled within our communities. I struggle with a phrase that we hear sometimes, which is, I don't see color. And it's very strange, because that must mean you either colorblind or your eyes are not the same as mine. So we have to see color. We have to acknowledge that we have difference. But we also have to acknowledge that difference can be good and bad depending on our experiences. So when we look at discrimination, we're looking at the experience that people actually go through. So for instance, if you've been robbed by a young kid, whether white, black, Asian, whatever, you might develop an unconscious discrimination towards those people that have robbed you. So we have to honestly acknowledge that actually my prejudice has come from an experience, and that is not the truth. So what we do is develop truths based on our experience. A very major factor that I've been observing that I think is having a major impact is media. And media, if you break the word down, it's me ideas. It's giving me ideas, media, me ideas. And then through that is television, telling you a vision, and then programming. So what the media seems to be doing is creating all of these stories and narratives that seem to be having people fight against each other, see their differences as negative, rather than celebrating the positives of difference. And when you look, what's really interesting is when I look at the online world versus the real world, the beauty of difference in the real world is amazing. So if we look at simple things like food, in London especially as well, because we have quite a melting pot of different cultures, ethnicities, ages. It's beautiful. But when you look at things like food, when you look at the religious celebrations, when you look at the diversity of thought, this all comes from mixing. But the media seem to put up these put up these stories that fit an agenda of division, because the more you can divide people, the easier it is to control them, and actually then they get their way of disempowering communities. But what's been really sad is that with all of this playing out, that the most vulnerable seem to be suffering the most. So as we've seen, mental health has gone up, domestic violence has gone up times 600% is what I've been told, the last stats, which is, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And these are all factors of discrimination. We're not looking at, there's economic discrimination, there's financial, there's schooling. Like even when you look at school, we don't learn about our identities. So part of this is not knowing our individual identities and how beautiful, and the proper history. So if you don't know who you are and where you've come from, how do you know where you're going? Because you don't know how to introduce yourself. Something simple as that. I'm this, I'm that. I'm from this tribe, I'm from this tribe. And we have a culture of tribalism. So people want to be part of something. They want to be able to fill their human needs. So we have 6 human needs. We have the need for love and connection. We have the need for contribution. We have the need for growth. We have the need for feeling significant and important. And so when we're looking at these different needs, when you are able to fill these needs, you can begin to feel better and see other people. But for me, what's most important is that we understand, 1, who we are, 2, what the external factors are now that we know who we are. Because it's very important that we understand a lot of the world out there is mirroring what we feel inside. So when people are discriminating, it often shows me, because they're trying to meet a need. So for instance, if I hate you, it means I don't feel good within myself. So I'm what I'm calling projecting. I'm pointing the finger. So when you point the finger out, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And that's how we show people, when you point that finger, the responsibility is still on you. And the only way you're going to change that experience is if you change yourself. So I've made it within the VRU, I've made it quite clear that my commitment is to turn some of this pain, this uncomfortability into something positive, where we can have conversations where we could say, yeah, you know what? In my past, I was a little bit racist, or not racist in the sense of like, I hate all the race, but I used to get, so for instance, with my personal experience, I was stabbed by a group of Black boys. So every time I saw groups of Black boys, I got nervous, because I thought, oh, are they part of the same group? And so I had to acknowledge that and say, you know what, I had a preconceived judgment of Black boys based on an experience which was valid, but actually it doesn't serve me anymore. I don't need to survive anymore. I need to cut that experience and say that was that one experience, and going forwards, I can now embrace young Black boys. And now I do. It was in my mind. I think we create all these mental programs that stop us from actually living in our true essence. So just to end, because I'm realizing that time is going, I think the most important thing in relation to this race and discrimination is that we start to have those uncomfortable conversations and start to acknowledge people's feelings, like, okay, what is this bringing up for you? But how do we move the conversation forward? So we're tired of being people like research. I'm tired of being, oh, Jerome, what do you think? No, it's not about what I think. It's what do we want to do now that you've shown your experience, and we've been going through this for a long time now. What do we want to do in a long-term basis? How do we want to meaningfully work together? But how can we create a space of authenticity where people can actually throw out what those unconscious discriminations are, those unconscious biases, and get to a place where we can go, you know what, valid, but how do we move this forwards? But yeah, thank you for your time. I know it's only 10 minutes, so I could go into all sorts, but I thought I'd limit myself.
Well, thank you, Jerome, for that. And I'm sure everyone is giving you amazing And thank you for that. And it's true what you were saying, like even just reflecting on your points, like the 6 human needs, like how important it is just to understand one another in general. It's great that you actually finished earlier than we thought because you started a bit earlier. But if there was anything else you wanted to quickly say, you do have 4 minutes left. But is there anything?
Not really. I was just, for me, it was about, so responsibility is very clear for me. So, we have to be responsible not only for our actions, but our language. So when they say that there's that phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's a lie. Words absolutely hurt you. So even in the word spelling, it's a spell. You're literally sending energy to people. So we have to be conscious of like even when you look at now, everything's online, but people are still affected by certain things. So that shows you that you don't have to physically hurt, but you can hurt people through words. So we have to be conscious of our language, get to a place of self-awareness and understanding. So don't listen to respond. Don't be like, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, let's do it. No, understand to develop. So we need to understand to develop, which is take time to really hear what these people are saying who are experiencing these different things. You don't have to know what they go through. You don't have to have even experienced it, but the compassion part of it is important. When we show up compassionately for each other, build that deep connection and come up with a meaningful solution, And so for me, it's all about the meaning. And what I'll do is I'll share in the chat the 6 human needs so people can see. What you would do is when you start to see human needs, so like I look at, okay, what needs are people feeling when they're communicating with others? And sometimes it's the need for growth, it's the need for contribution, it's the need to make love and connection, it's the need to feel important. So you can see how people communicate, and then you can show up. You can say, I recognize that you feel the need to be important. How can we meet that need? And so the way we communicate, more loving.
But thank you for your amazing contribution so far, but you have 2 minutes left.
I love the power, So when we're able to communicate through the needs and through eyes of like not judgment, but just kind of like, I see you and I'm here to hear you out, not just to listen and be like, okay, well, what plan are we? No, I want to hear you and compassionately hear your experiences, so then we can create a deep connection and actually work on a long-term meaningful solution, because a lot of the systems that we work under are very short-term. They're very 3 years, they're money orientated. So they have cycles, 2 or 3 years. And what we need here is, we don't need a 2 or 3 year, we need a future thinking plan, which is ongoing. So something that doesn't have a time limit, it's just ongoing. And we commit as humans, we commit to acknowledging each other's experiences, but moving forwards to a place where we can live in harmony. We're not saying everyone has to get on, but that there needs to be a level of respect for each other's individual worth, because we're happy to steal ideas from all over the world, but when it comes to the negative side, we're not happy to see that out. So and I think the UK is a beautiful place to do that, because it's so rich with many different cultures, especially London as well. And I think this is the hub of the world where we can actually show what positive integration, the variety of different cultures, people is about. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jerome. Right on time. So we are going to go into our next individual who is going to give evidence. And Michael, would you like to introduce the next person?
Yeah, so thank you, Jerome, for that presentation. The next speaker is Jermaine Sterling from the Mary Seacole Trust. So I'm going to pass it over to him.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for inviting me into this. I'll probably be the first person to say I'm a little bit nervous, but it is what it is. Jerome didn't admit that at the very beginning, but he delivered that all very, very well. So well done to you, Jerome. I thought I'd give you a bit of a flavour, really. So I'm a trustee for the Mary Seacole Trust, and I'm chair of their education committee. Now, for those of you who are on the call, you've probably heard of somebody called Florence Nightingale. I know I certainly did, even the name, even if you didn't know what she did. But there was a common affection for somebody else called Mary Seacole. Now, Mary Seacole was born in Kingston, Jamaica about 200 years ago. Her mum was Jamaican, her dad was Scottish, so Mary was actually mixed race. Now, it was her mum that introduced her to the traditional healing treatments and remedies, and Mary loved traveling. Now, the link to today is that she offered her skills back then to support the British fight in the Crimea War, which is actually in modern-day Ukraine. She was denied at the time by the War Office, amongst other funding avenues, and race and discrimination played a part. So what essentially happened is that she went independently out to the Crimea War and basically built a hotel and cared for the soldiers herself. Now, she earned the nickname Mother Seacole at the time. Now, the strangest part is that Mary died about 1881, and then bang, completely disappeared off the radar for about 100 years, until there was a group of nurses that came to Kensal Green Cemetery, where she's buried, and there was a lovely gentleman called Lord Clive Soley who promised to raise money for a statue for Mary, which would have been unheard of. A statue of a black woman, really? In this country? So what was important was that in 2004, Mary was voted the greatest Black Briton, which is an amazing achievement. So that campaign was launched, and the statue was finally unveiled in the grounds of St Thomas's Hospital, just down in Waterloo. What was interesting is that that's also the same hospital that created the Florence Nightingale Nursing Academy as well. Not too far, actually, from Nelson Mandela's statue just over Westminster Bridge. So the key part is, it has never been more important to recognise Black and minority ethnic people who have made important contributions to our society over the centuries. Like many others, Mary was hidden for about 100 years, but thankfully we got that statue up and away. But the work doesn't end there. As well as being, the guardians of that statue, we want the public and young people in particular to benefit from Mary's legacy and to understand why her story is our story, because that message is timeless. So as a nurse, she overcame racism within the establishment to go to the battlefields under her own steam, and she did that at the age of around 50. All right. So that's compassion, bravery, sheer determination. And those fine qualities obviously speak for themselves. But what was true for Mary back then is equally true today, that racism must always be challenged and at every level in society. So importantly, all we want, I say we, the royal we, is a level playing field, but it's got to be demonstrated. Jerome spoke earlier about the media. Of course, they've got a big part to play in perceptions of race. An example is, it was great to see earlier this week, there was a Filipino nurse who was amongst the first in the world to administer the COVID vaccine. But what we need to see more of is BAME people receiving the vaccine and receiving the jab itself. That will change the narrative, because we know that there's a distinct lack of trust from BAME people around medicines, around the justice system, around the government, and around certain decision makers. These are facts. All right. You could take Marcus Rashford, for example, just because I'm a Man United fan and it is what it is, even though we've had a terrible week with Man United. But anyway, so Marcus Rashford, he's doing an amazing job in supporting disadvantaged youngsters. And then a week or two later, there were some sections of the media that criticised him for buying property for his own family. And he had to come out and defend himself in what he's doing. So we all need to challenge, and we all need to be brave enough to challenge the in-your-face discrimination despite the consequences. Jerome mentioned about George Floyd, that raised the bar this year. But the sad truth is how many similar circumstances have happened since. Right? How many further examples have there been of public discrimination that is in our face? Fair enough, that was happening in America, and it's widely acknowledged that there's work to do for the police here to engage minority communities. I won't go into my own reflections with the police, but I will say that I did feel guilty the last time they pulled me over for something I didn't even do, even though my newborn baby was in the car. But anyway, I'm encouraging young people to feel empowered and change that narrative for your futures. When I was at school, my 10-year-old daughter will say that was centuries ago. She's only 10, so I'll give her a G. But anyway, we didn't learn about Black history. What I do remember was learning about Henry VIII, and I remember about the Tudors. But how can it be that in 2020, we're still asking for a level playing field for youngsters to be taught history from all contributions to British society, the good and the bad? So, for example, the debate is still rumbling on about, tearing down statues, which are linked to slavery, for example. This is the negative side of British history, but it is still history. So rather than tearing those monuments down, actually, there could be a narrative attached to that piece of history, where those individuals actually made financial and significant contributions to cities and establishments. But there should be some sort of memoriam explaining why that statue is there, rather than tearing everything down. Otherwise, we're going to be ripping down a lot of sections of this country. But what was nice is it was fantastic to see the overwhelming tributes to Mary Seacole and the other heroes during Black History Month. If you didn't, for the children that are here, let me know directly, and I'm happy to speak to your teacher, all right? More than happy, all right? But the idea of celebrating Black history or its involvement within our education is something that we fully support. We developed the Young Seacole Ambassadors Initiative and the awards ceremony. We've invited local schools to provide, a creative piece of work on the modern day Mary Seacole. We had hundreds of responses, and earlier this year, that ceremony was held jointly at City Hall with Lynk Up crew, where we recognise those contributions. But the truth is that we all see examples of race and discrimination daily, and we have to fight those preconceived ideas and prejudices. But young people must be empowered to make those decisions, especially where those decisions affect them. We don't see enough positive stories about young people. Well, that's the sad truth. I'd have to think very hard about the last positive news story on the 6 o'clock news, for example, about a young BAME person. So we've got to create those positive stories. So if you're doing something awesome, share.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jermaine, but you have 2 minutes left.
Sure. So young people are the future change makers, and there's some wonderful talent out there. So, for example, did you know that there's no non-white person that's ever been made on a British currency before? Isn't it weird that something like that, there's been no acknowledgement of a contribution from all forms of society? So how awesome would it be if we saw a diverse person on a coin, for example? All right. So all I would suggest is that you listen to the courage and stories in the face of adversity for young people. Our youth advisory committee have a platform for them at our board meetings. They sit on our board and they speak and shape us as a national charity. They work with the Link Up crew who've built up their confidence, and they engage in the exercises that they wouldn't normally have access to, but we need to see more of that, all right? Now, the key part for me, just touching on a couple of stats, for people who look like me, I'm more likely to be arrested, harmed by COVID, section for mental health, rates of prosecution 3 times higher, or are more likely to be excluded from school. But the fact is that actually we still need to showcase those positive things out there. At the Young Vic Theatre, there's a massive montage from Marsha Johnson, Alwick Cross and Mary Seacole emblazoned across their rooftop. It's actually quite embarrassing about how big it is. But for us, we value everyone's contribution, and we believe that Mary's values apply across society, and we'll take every opportunity to promote them, all right? We recognise that there's a wider movement across the UK of people who want to see a fairer and more equal society. Mary's statue stands as that symbol of the world that we need to build for future generations. As a final plug, Mary Seacole has a movie coming out next year, which will be a Hollywood movie. But for myself, I grew up in South London. I left school without any aims. I struggled with teachers academically, but apparently I was very bright. But I'll tell you now, I look like this. And sometimes I can feel like the system's against me and it's set up to make me fail. But if I can be here on this panel, be part of this journey and the discussions that you're going through today, all we need is for people to be inspired. All right, so to the young people listening, change the narrative, enhance your learning, set the pace, nurture your talent, don't give up, have those difficult conversations, create and seek opportunities, and importantly, support each other to change the game. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Jermaine, for that amazing contribution. So we are just going to go into our last panelist member because Kelsey can't join us today, unfortunately. But Hewan, would you like to introduce our last panelist member?
Thank you, Precious. Thank you very much, Jermaine, for the really inspiring words. And I would like to pass on to Solomon Curtis.
Thank you, Hewan. Thank you, Jermaine and Jerome as well for your contributions. Hi guys, I'm Solomon. So I work in the sport team at City Hall. I'm one of the senior managers, and my job is to oversee Sadiq Khan's community investment program for sport called Sport Unite. It's an £8.8 million program. And so my contribution, I always talk a little bit about race and discrimination within the sports sector. To give you a bit of an idea about me before that, I have no background in sport before coming to City Hall. I was someone that has been a campaigner my whole life, politically. So from being excluded from school at the age of 15 and being a victim of discrimination, I decided to get active in politics and the Labour Party. Stood to be a member of Parliament twice. And interestingly, when I was listening to Jerome and Jermaine, I remember a really important moment for me was running for Parliament in Brighton the day before the election, and I was driving and I was pulled over by the police, and they treated me pretty badly. I was handcuffed by them, and I was like, take me into the into the police station. They were like, why is this guy so keen to be taken in? And it was only the point at which they realized who I was that I had the kind of chief officer come down and make sure that I was okay and sit down and apologize. And so I was lucky and privileged to be in that position, but many people aren't. To talk about the sport side of things, I want to talk about four things. So first of all, talk about the grassroots experience of around racism and discrimination in sport. Essentially, the inequalities that we have in our society, race and discrimination that people experience, trickles down to a grassroots level. So if we look at the stats around participation in sport, we see that 53% of Asian, excluding Chinese, people will be getting their kind of recommended activity levels in sport. 57% of Black people will be getting their same experience, same kind of level of activity. And when you compare that to white people, that's 65% or 64%, depending on white European or white British. So you're far less likely to be engaged in sport at a grassroots level. And that's partly fueled by the experience that people have. So to give you an example, there was a study, and I think it was in 2002, and there was a study of participants of Muslim women, and what came out of some of the feedback from that group of women who were in who were in that study was that their motivation for taking part in sport wasn't the same as white counterparts. They didn't want to match a westernized female body image, and so when sport and fitness was promoted to them as a way to kind of achieve an ideal body image, that didn't resonate with them, because that wasn't what they were looking for. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of intersectionality. So the fact that when we think about people of color and their experience in sport, we have to recognize that those experiences are disproportionately worse when they have different intersectional identities. So we think about the experience of Black women will be disproportionately worse, particularly Black LGBT people or Asian LGBT people, or as Jerome said, we're talking about people of color with disabilities are going to be disproportionately affected. And something which is important to think about when we think about intersectionality is that it's not people don't know what they're being discriminated for all the time. They just know that they're different and that they're other to that person. So if you're Black and gay, you don't really know all the time if you're going to be discriminated against for being gay, if you're going to be discriminated for being black. If you're a black woman, you don't know if you're going to be discriminated against for being black or for being a woman. If you're disabled and you're Asian, you're not sure if you're being discriminated against for your disability or your ethnicity. And so that's something which is really important to consider. And equally thinking about when we do create safe spaces and when we do create opportunities that we don't ingrain our own discrimination in that. For example, there was a black cricket club in the north of England that was kind of created as a safe space for black men to play cricket without kind of having discrimination from basically white people playing cricket. And what that study also showed was that the kind of the hyper-masculinity of that group was shown to exclude black women from that cricket group as well. And so that's something which is important to consider. The third thing I wanted to talk about was around careers in sport, but also the media. And this is something that Jermaine and Jerome have both touched on, so it's important. It's worth saying that when you look at the professional game, athletes are pretty diverse. In fact, they often are they're often overrepresented to how they're represented in society. So you tend to see particularly black athletes on the field. But what we don't see is we don't see them represented in management positions, in decision-making bodies, or in the media. And I want to give an example in the media because we know what happened with Raheem Sterling, or what still happens with him. But he's become this amazing advocate for tackling discrimination in sport. And he gave an example. There are two players at Man City. I'm not a Man City fan. I know Jermaine isn't a Man City fan because he says he's a Man U fan. I'm a West Ham fan. But Raheem talked about two colleagues of his at Man City. One of them is...
Solomon.
Yeah?
Sorry, just to let you know, thank you for your amazing contribution, but you have 2 minutes left.
Perfect, no worries. The first is Tazmin Adarabioyo. He and who's the other one? Phil Foden. And so they were both pretty new players at the time. Neither had really had their debut. And there were 2 articles written by the Daily Mail. And just so you know, the Daily Mail was one of the 2 newspapers I always refused to speak to or do an interview with. But let me tell you what they did. The first article was about Tazmin. It basically said, earns 25k a week, splashes out £2.25 million on Mansion despite never playing a game. The headline on Phil Foden was, Starlet spends £2 million on home for his mum. Tazmin was buying the house for his mum as well. So we know that there's a different narrative here in the media. And there's an important quote, which I remember a player saying, which has said, you know, we're comfortable with our black bodies excelling on the field of play, but not our black brains sitting beside them in the boardroom. And we have to think about, in the sport context, the colonial links and historical idea around the black body being powerful, being strong, and being maintained and controlled to just one element, and the brain being separated from that. And the last thing before I end is I wanted to talk about the professional sport. And the fact that we just have to look at, you know, if we look at the England-Bulgaria game last year, we have, you know, statistics that show that 83% of BME competitors have experienced racism in British sport. And I'm really empowered by the fact that athletes are showing some courage to speak out about racism. Recently, seeing footballers at Millwall taking the knee in support of the murder of George Floyd. And it's important to say that it was a murder because that's a really important thing, even though they were booed by fans. And so we shouldn't rely on athletes to fix the system, but we've got to do more to kind of show solidarity with them when they try and speak out. I'll stop there.
Very Solomon, thank you for the really good contribution and the very inspiring words.
Thank you, Solomon, and thank you to our amazing chairs who was able to facilitate this session so well. Just before we go into our Q&A session, I'm going to introduce Aaliyah, who is a part of our chair group. And Aaliyah, would you mind just saying a bit about yourself and what you're looking forward to?
Hi, I'm Aaliyah and I'm 11 years old, and I'm looking forward to hearing on what all of you think about and on your questions.
Thank you, Aaliyah. So we're going to go into our Q&A section now. And Hewan, would you like to ask the first question?
Yeah, sure. My first question is mainly to Jermaine. What can be done to ensure that all schools discuss race and discrimination?
Make sure that you first, it's a really good question. You've got to be sure that you have that conversation with your teachers, and I think that it's important that that young people, education isn't tiered down. Education is about also tiering up, and there's got to be, you could argue, reverse coaching in that respect. So if there should be more race and discrimination discussed in schools, then ask for it. Yeah, that's the first thing. Make sure that the teacher is aware that there may be some sensitivities there. There may be some difficult conversations to be had. But ultimately, it is about holding the school to account to have those slightly, uncomfortable conversations about what works well and what doesn't work so well. But it is absolutely fundamental that there are positive stories shared within that conversation. So I think for the powers that be, I think it's a curriculum decision as well, to make sure that whether that's part of the citizenship GCSE that I know that my son's about to take, there should be wider discussions around race and discrimination, at least within that, and certainly probably 6 to 8 years below that as well.
Thank you, Jermaine.
Thank you so much, Jermaine, for that contribution. So we have another question, and this question is coming from Aaliyah. Aaliyah, would you like to ask your question?
I have a question for Jerome. My question is, are kids actually getting taught what is actually happening about race and discrimination?
Thanks, Aaliyah. You see, when you ask, is it for younger kids or all kids?
It's just any type of kids, from primary or secondary or even college.
Yeah. If I'm honest, I don't think it's being spoken about enough, because teachers are quite uncomfortable with these conversations. And how do you have it? How do you have these conversations which are going to be beneficial and not create more fear? So to answer your question bluntly, I don't think it's happening. I don't think it's happening in a way which is useful for young people to take that apart and be like, you know what, actually the difference that we have is good. Being Black is powerful. But I do think that it needs to happen. It has to happen. It's not even it's something that needs to be engraved in terms of I think Jermaine was saying about citizenship. So maybe we move that onto personal identity curriculum, where people get to explore their own identities and share, what does that mean? What does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be Asian, white? And, exploring the roots of our cultures, so that people can really, because that is what it seems to come up is, even when I look at relationships, or love, I never knew what a good model of love was, because I was always portrayed an image of negative love. And so even those little things, incorporating that self-love. So yeah, I don't think it is done, but it is definitely something that needs to happen.
Thank you.
And Michael, would you like to ask one of the questions to our panel?
Yes, I'd like to ask Solomon, that do you think that the media are hiding the fact that we are not equal, and if so, why?
I do, Michael. I think there's something important here about the media, and I think it touches on a couple of the other questions and slightly what Aaliyah was asking. We have to break down basically what people call white thought, and that's the thought that the media works within. So when they do approach racism and discrimination, it's from a perspective of white people being a default and other people being the other. And it's really important to recognize that to be white is a social construct. It's not, you know, it's not really a thing in the sense that it's not some, and you know, if we look at even the history of the world, this is quite a new construct that's come about in kind of recent history. And I think there's a couple of things about the media. One is when you look at the media, it's not just about ethnicity, it's also about class. When you look at the media, you know, you have an average of about 60-70% being private schooled, who are in kind of the powerful positions of the media. Then the second thing is and then you look at people right at the top of the media and people like Rupert Murdoch, and you see that what their interests are is kind of maintaining the status quo and maintaining the way things are, because that benefits the people that work there. And so I think they obviously want to talk about race and discrimination in a certain way, but I think the kind of better solution isn't necessarily going to be completely about changing that media, but about creating new forms of media. And we're seeing that to some extent about where people are getting their information and their knowledge from. So I'm not necessarily confident that that's ever going to change from the mainstream media, but I think you can break down the mainstream media long term.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Solomon. And Abigail, would you like to ask one of your questions?
What can be done to make people aware that there are consequences to racism and discriminatory behavior? And I'd like to ask this to Jerome.
Okay, so so that was about consequences of discriminatory behavior. I think there's two ends to this. So there's the end where the authorities actually follow through with this, and it's kind of there in our system, but it's about how do like, for instance, the police hold themselves accountable, or how do we have a place where the community can hold the police accountable to their actions? Because what happens is when complaints are made, the police are the ones who choose where the complaints go to, and it's counterproductive to actually making something. So, and then there's the end of the community. So as we've seen with Marcus Rashford's thing, the government said they wouldn't support what they were doing, and then the community said, we're going to just do this anyway. And so there's a responsibility on us as the community members to actually, sometimes when things are not working, and I get really frustrated with a lot of these systems because everything takes long, everything needs a strategy, but actually a lot of the solutions are very simple, and the community seem to come up with them and make it happen. And then you can find that bodies can get behind it. So then I think the community, an idea for me would be that in relation to policing, community members would go out with the police and make sure that all of their policing, like stop and searches, are lawful, or looking at those systems and seeing where are the gaps and what does it actually really mean to have an equality, diversity, inclusion plan. Everyone's got one in their businesses because they have to have one, but how does that play out in day-to-day life, in schools, in workplaces, and you know, all arenas? I hope that answers your question. Don't know if it did.
And Abigail, did you have another question?
Is there a place for young students to understand what's happening?
Yeah, I think so. I think there definitely is. I think I'm really encouraged by young people today because I'm still quite young. Bex, don't laugh. But I think there's even a difference between my age group and your age group, Abigail. I see a lot more hope in your age group that your understanding of race discrimination and the solutions will be far more radical than mine. So I think understanding's part of it. You know, let me give you an example, and this is what I'd like to see with students as well. Is someone at City Hall once said to me in a meeting that I don't feel comfortable talking about race, and my response was, you shouldn't really have your job if you don't feel comfortable talking about race, because you're working at an organisation that represents Londoners, and Londoners are diverse, so you need to just get a grip and and kind of educate yourself here. And I think the reason I mention that is because it's important that understanding is more than just understanding that racism and discrimination happens. You need to understand why it happens, and you have to understand the context and the political context to who holds power and why power has allowed kind of racism and discrimination to be a consequence of a certain kind of political agenda and context. So I think it is important to understand it, but we've got to keep moving towards understanding the root causes and the kind of institutional factors.
Well, thank you, Solomon, for that, and thank you, Abigail, for asking those two amazing questions. We have another question from Hewan. Hewan, would you like to ask this question?
Thank you, Precious. My question is from Doreen, who's a part of the school, and their question is, do you know how the government is planning to overcome racism? I would like to pick Jermaine to answer this.
The short answer is no. I wish I did. So as I say, the short answer is no. I wish I did understand fully how the government was to overcome racism. I think the government has, what can be a little bit disappointing, is that they have their own in-house issues around discrimination. So a recent example will be the Windrush scandal, which affects my grandparents. That is I don't think it could be any more public about the mistakes that have been made around the Windrush scandal. What's worrying is that was 50, 60 years ago, and we're still learning from mistakes about racism and discrimination by the government. So no, I don't have an immediate answer on that. I think there will be, I think all I can ask for is that they have young people informing the government about policy change to support ideologies and to combat racism and race and discrimination, because it's your generation or the younger generation that will be most affected in future. So it's not an easy one for me to answer. I think Jerome might have an answer, but not one for me, sadly.
Thank you, Jermaine.
Thank you, Hewan, for that. Just going on from Hewan's amazing question, I just wanted if any of the other panelist members, Jerome or Solomon, would like to answer the question that Hewan just asked Jermaine. So this question was from a school, and the school asked, do you know how the government is planning to overcome racism? It is quite a tricky question, but just any contribution would be nice.
I don't mind coming in. I don't think the government is focused on combating racism. If I'm honest, I think even if we look at our Prime Minister, he has a track record of talking about Muslim women as letterboxes, talking about Black people as having watermelon smiles, using racist terms throughout his career. I think the one thing the government has done, if we bring a political angle, and this is really, really important for people to think about. So when I was running for Parliament, I was very aware that I faced a lot of racism and discrimination in the Labour Party. People are always surprised when I say that, but it was a struggle to even get picked to run for Parliament. When I looked to the Conservatives, they were much better at getting non-white people into positions of power, into the running for Parliament. If we look at the government now, they have, for the first time in history, 50% of the 4 great offices of state are non-white people. Priti Patel as the Home Secretary and Rishi Sunak as the Chancellor. And what worries me is that these two individuals have their own experience of race and discrimination throughout their lives. And so what it means is that the government can argue, when we try and challenge the government on their race and discrimination policy, they can argue, well, it's all well coming from, the Labour Party's white alternative, but actually we've got these diverse people in positions of power who understand race and discrimination. But then in reality, the policies that are being made by people like Priti Patel, deporting people back to Jamaica just last week, does not make her a spokesperson for racism and discrimination. It doesn't mean that she's interested in tackling race and discrimination, but I think those two people will often be used as a cover-up for not approaching the issue properly.
Thank you so much, Solomon, especially for that like real and transparent answer. Jerome, do you have anything to touch on how you possibly think the government could help in trying to end racism?
I agree with both what Solomon and Jermaine were saying. If we look at their history of the government, there is no indication that they want to change. And actually, discrimination serves a purpose, because it serves a purpose of division, which means people won't question when they're not making the right decisions for humanity. And it's weird, really crazy at this time when it's less, for me, it's less about race, it's more about social class. The social class divide is getting bigger and bigger, and decisions are really, as we can see, it's playing out now into, you know, high rates of everything, mental health, suicides. So I'm not really interested in looking at the government for answers, because they're the ones who create the problem. So actually, I don't look at them for solutions, because I have to see, like, why would they, how is it we got to this place and they still don't understand, they don't understand the experiences of those in our communities. So how could they make decisions that are going to serve us best? It's not going to come from them, it's going to come from us. And that's why I was saying before about responsibility. It's not about saying, hey, you've done crap for us and you need to change. We need to show them the change. They need to model us, and know that we collectively will stick together in this and make a change ourselves. Because if we're going to wait on them, we're going to be waiting for a long time, because their purpose, based on the history, is to use what's good about different cultures. So, you know, the teas that they got from India, you know, the culture with music, all these different things that they take, but the negative sides of it, they don't want to acknowledge. So like the slavery and how that's impacting on people now, and how they use their media. Their media just shows us where they're at right now. So actually, I'm not really interested in getting an answer for them. What I'm interested in is actually giving the community back their power to understand their rights, work with logic, and we create something that they have to run with anyway. No, so I just think that it's more about looking at ourselves, and it's about giving our personal power and seeing what we can do within ourselves, especially young people, because you are the energy, you are the when I speak to young people, it's so refreshing. They acknowledge difference and they love it. And it's about learning from them. There's an exchange that can take place. They learn from them about, you know, how it is to integrate properly and acknowledge people's differences. But yeah, I don't have any faith in the government of what I've seen, if I'm honest.
Thank you so much for that, Jerome. So firstly, I would like to thank you everyone for asking the questions we have asked. So next we're going to go into the general audience. And Doreen, I know your school has been contributing so much and we're very thankful for that. And I just was wondering if any of your students in your school had any more questions they would like to ask.
So the first one's from Arabella. I think she's from year 3, and it's just asking, where could we visit in London to learn about the world? That's such an amazing question. So I don't know which one of you would want to answer on that. So Jerome, Solomon, or Jermaine?
I think there are a few places in London, Arabella. I think there are some amazing pockets of culture in London that people don't really realise. So when you think, where should you go in London? Everyone says, okay, go to Tower Bridge, go to Westminster. I always say go to somewhere like Southall, because you'll get the best kind of Asian food there. And you'll see amazing celebrations when you have different kind of religious celebrations. Equally, you know, if you wanted to go and, you know, my family are East Londoners from Newham, and you'll see, I think it's still the most kind of diverse borough. So you'll see kind of the world in one. I think this is the beauty of London. I think you've kind of summed it up, Arabella, that London is a place that, for all of its historical wrongs and rights. It's a place where people across the world come together, and at a grassroots level, most people like each other, and they like the difference about each other, and they want to learn about each other. And I think east, west, north, south, there are little pockets everywhere where you'll see that. It's a good question.
Thank you, Solomon. Jermaine, I don't know if you want to mention the Mary Seacole Trust where the statue is. So like, I don't know if, like, I think that in itself is such a powerful thing for young people to even know about or even attend to go see.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to be selfish, Taz, but thank you. So we have got the statue over at St Thomas's Hospital. I mean, it's 14 foot wide. You can't miss it for Westminster Bridge. And, you know, as I say, it's a real focal point, mostly from a nursing background. But just to repeat, it is the first statue of a named Black female anywhere in the UK. So it's an important piece of history just by erecting the statue itself. But going back to that particular question, I think Solomon's absolutely right. No matter where you go in London, you will find pockets of the world there in front of you. That is the beauty of London, the fact that it is so diverse. So whether you're going from, I don't know, Tooting Bec to Hackney to, you know, Kensington and Chelsea to Croydon, you know, there will be elements within every part of London where you can learn more about that particular area and importantly about London itself. So I just would say explore as much as you can, but what I would say is do your research. That's what I will say, do your research. Don't believe everything on the internet as well.
Thank you, Jermaine. Precious?
So, and we have another amazing question from Laura, who's in year 6. And Laura's asked, how has discrimination changed the life of a person in London? Such an insightful question, Laura. So would anyone in the panel like to answer this question?
I could go there. For me, I've had negative experiences with discrimination in relation to how I look. So like Solomon, I ran for local councillor and I experienced people like, oh, you speak well. I'm like, what does that mean? And so it's actually driven me in a good way. So it's driven me to be like, you know what, maybe it's about they don't understand. And maybe what I want to do is challenge that stereotype that we have people who wear caps or wear hoods or anything like that. So actually, in my experience, I've been able to build bridges between different people. So, you know, those who like, I remember the local councillor I met, and he was like a middle-class white man, and he didn't really have the understanding of like what it was like living in an area where it was populated with crime. And he came down, he said, look, I'm going to come and just see what it's like. And when he saw how the young people was like, he's like, they're really nice lads. And so it's like that media image completely shifted and he was able to build a meaningful relationship. So for me, I've done that in my political kind of arena. I've done that in my personal capacity and also done it in terms of like building those bridges and getting people to have those conversations where it's very rich and people are like, oh my God, it's amazing. Like stories for me are just amazing, but also you can learn from them. So sometimes some people don't realize what offends other people. And when you have those conversations without like it going into a place of like violence or shouting, you can actually begin to understand, oh, because sometimes ignorance is what makes it happen. And so when you're aware of your ignorance, that's the important thing. Because sometimes I see all this judgment, it's like, well, maybe they didn't actually know what offended other people. So it's about acknowledging that. And then now you know, what do you do with what you know now? So yeah, for me, it's been quite positive to build bridges, as I call it.
Thank you so much, Jerome, for that. Especially like drawing from the idea that ignorance is bliss. That's something I just found out recently, what it really means. Like it doesn't affect you if you don't understand or if you don't know. So that was an amazing touch. I was just wondering if any of our other panelists would like to answer that question from Laura.
Yeah, I'm happy to add. I mean, I've got a 14-year-old son who's mixed race, and I've got a 10-year-old daughter who's mixed race. What's strange is that one of them would probably identify as Black, and the other one would identify as mixed race. So my son, being a little bit older, has seen more of the world. He's probably had more personal experiences in terms of discrimination in front of him. and therefore he's formed his own opinion of what he's calls himself, if that makes sense. Whereas my daughter, an airy fairy, completely sheltered with life, actually wouldn't, she'd be hidden from that type of discrimination up to this point. But I think the important part is that they share those stories between each other, and the idea is that they challenge those conceptions about themselves. So, for example, I was in a car showroom just a couple of months ago. The guy spoke to me. He said, "Yeah, I'll be back in 5 minutes." I already knew what I wanted, and then it was Mia who looked at me and said, "Daddy, they've been gone about 10 minutes, and they're still sitting there, and they've not said anything to you." And my view is that that was the first experience that Mia had in relation to unconscious bias, whereby these individuals in the dealership didn't think that I could afford to buy that car. For a 10-year-old to see that before me, I thought was quite a powerful statement, and she's only 10 years old. To say I actually went to another dealership and bought the damn car, but anyway, so it's just, as I say to you, I think it does depend on your own self. It's about challenging that ignorance, but also listening to that ignorance, but challenging it in a positive and constructive way. So that's where I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like Jermaine, just comment off on what you're saying, like it's important to challenge the ignorance and also educate at the same time. So both parties are leaving the conversation well informed and understanding more. I would like to give a big thank you to Waze, Arabella and Laura, the 3 students who asked questions, because it can be quite nerve-wracking to ask questions, and your questions were so insightful and very true. Like we always say this, I wish you young people were the ones leading policy and leading in government, because the world will be a much brighter place. So if I'm sure that no one else has any more questions, I think we will just go into the presentations. So the first presentation is from one of our very own Link Up crew members, Kaya. And just before I show you her presentation, I was just wondering if Jermaine, you would like to touch on a bit more about the work that Kaya does, maybe, and not too much about what she's going to perform, but just give us a bit of snippet and explain to us her work.
I probably should have prepared for this. Okay. So,
no pressure.
No pressure at all. Okay, so Kaya is part of the Youth Advisory Committee for the Mary Seacole Trust. Kaya is a wonderfully talented singer as well, and we've often asked her to express her views, in a vocal format, and thankfully she is absolutely delighted to be part of the Link Up crew as well, and hopefully showcase her talent for you today.
Thank you, Jermaine. And I'm just going to get this up. Unfortunately, she can't be with us live, but we've got the next best thing, which is the amazing performance to be played to you now.
Oh, 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 2019, before the clock struck, you made a wish, that one wish of good luck. January 1st, the clock struck 1, 2023, double reflection new start. March 21st, GCSEs coming up. Little did I know, Rona's coming to mess that up. 2 days later, the announcement came up. We're all in lockdown, I guess summer's giving up. Everything went south when he was pleading for his life. I can't breathe under a knee, he couldn't stand the fight. He couldn't stand the fight. We must stand in our truth. We must stand together. Don't tolerate, just educate. From first spot. Rise into the COVID-19, to Black Lives Matter flags flying. 2020 was meant to be my year, but 2021 stands strong with no fear. We must stand in our truth. Don't tolerate, just educate. We must stand
Wow, wow, wow. Like Kaya, she's honestly such an amazing performer. And sometimes it's just like, it just gives you chills because she's so young and she's so insightful. And just wherever Kaya is, I hope she knows that we love, like we're just showing her great positive energy right now because honestly, she always adds the best touch to our events. So I'm just going to go on to our next performance, who is a young lady called Princess K, and she's another part of our amazing Link Up crew members. And I hope everyone's gauging the sense that our Link Up crew members like are able to do everything. They're honestly superstars. They can perform, present, do everything. So if anyone wants to sign some big contracts, message them. So we're going into Princess K.
Hello, my name is Princess K and I'm 11 years old. I'm proud of my multi-heritage background and extremely proud to call myself Black. I have lots of heroes who have inspired me in so many different ways. In 1950s America, white people sat at the front of buses and Black people were kept apart at the back. Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white passenger. Her courage created change for Black people. Rosa Parks inspired me to be brave like her and to remember that people come in all shapes, colours, sizes and should be treated equally. Another of my heroes is Martin Luther King. He gave powerful speeches about equal rights for all. His most famous speech was called I Have a Dream. I have a dream too, to stand up for what I believe in, just like Martin Luther King. That's really important. Bob Marley is a huge hero of mine. He was Jamaican, like me, and brought people of every race together with his music. His message was peace, love, and unity. And he made me want to dance. I started dancing at 6 years old. My favourite dance style is Afrobeat dancing. It's a part of me. It's a part of my culture. Me and dance are like this. We stick together. Now, this brings me on to my modern-day hero, Stormzy. He gave me an opportunity to showcase my talent on the main stage at Glastonbury. I did have butterflies in my tummy, but once I started dancing, they all flew out. It felt amazing to be performing on that stage, something I will remember for the rest of my life. Sometimes people say unkind things to me just because of the colour of my skin, or tell me I can't do things. My advice is be proud of who you are and where you are from. And remember that anything is possible. We can make a change like Rosa Parks. We can have a dream and make it happen like Martin Luther King. We can bring peace like Bob Marley. We can all give people a chance like Stormzy. We are the heroes of the future.
Wow. Thank you, Princess K again. For that amazing short clip. It's just so infectious, the energy, and I especially love be proud of who you are and where you're from, like just taking that sense of pride. So just before I hand over to Tazmin and Anmol, I'd just like to thank the amazing chairs, Abigail, Hewan, Aaliyah, and Michael for their amazing questions and also introducing themselves so eloquently. And I'll like to thank our amazing panelists, so that's Jermaine, Solomon, and Jerome for adding your contributions. And yeah, so we have done with this segment of Race and Discrimination, and I'd like to thank everyone, and I'm handing over to Taz and Anmol.
Thank you so much, Precious, and a huge thank you to all the panelists for delivering your speeches, like being able to like kind of enlighten all of us. And then also the amazing co-chairs, co-chair, Precious, and the chairs, Abigail, Aaliyah, Michael, and Hewan. You guys have been amazing today. And I would just like to thank the school, so Doreen's school, a huge thank you, particularly to Waze, Laura, and Arabella for their amazing questions. That you should be very proud of yourselves for like putting yourselves forward to ask these questions. And yeah, I just like hope you found this insightful, and like I'm hoping that you guys will attend the next section. But for those of you that won't be attending the refugee and migrant section today, like I would just like to say a huge thank you. And I will give you guys the updates for the inquiry. And I'm hoping you have a lovely week and a lovely Christmas, hopefully a better New Year too. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, just to repeat, thank you so much, everyone, for the discussion, amazing involvement of the young people and the children. Thank you so much again. So we'll be going for our second break now, and for the next section will be the refugees and migrant section, and that will be starting at 3 o'clock. So if you can please join again using the same link, it'll be really good to see you. But if not, thank you again for your involvement, and we hope to carry on the conversation in the new year as well.